Hello, my name is Chrissy Champagne. You are listening to Residue, a true crime podcast dedicated to keeping you paranoid. Welcome back for part 2 of the Amityville Horror episodes. This week we're going to be talking about the Lutz family. Last week we talked about the DeFeo murders. So if you didn't listen to that one, you might want to go back, listen to that one first, and then come on back to me here, and we're going to talk about the movie franchise, the Amityville Horror. When we left you last week, we ended the story talking about the DeFeo family murders. To recap very quickly, on November 13th, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 members of his family at 112 Ocean Avenue. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 terms of 25 years to life in prison. So now the home is empty, and it is in that same year, in December 1975, the same year that Ronald DeFeo Jr. was convicted. December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children move into 112 Ocean Ave. After 28 days, the family fled the house, claiming to have been terrorized by ghosts, flies, a marching band, chilling temperatures, levitation, and a demon pig. So let's break down exactly what the Lutz family said happened to them during those 28 days, living in that very infamous Amityville home. So on December 18th, 1975, this is the day they first move into the home. The Lutz family consisted of George, 28 years old, and he was the owner of a land surveying company. He was a 3rd-generation owner of this entire operation. And his wife, Kathy Lutz, 30, who had just married that summer. So the two got married in July 1975. Kathy had 3 children from a previous marriage. They were Daniel, 9 years old, Christopher, 7 years old, and Melissa, or Missy, and she was 5 years old. And the couple wanted a home on the water and also a place where they could move George's business. So when they did look at 112 Ocean Ave, they just adored this home because not only did it have the 2 things that they really needed, but it was also a bargain. So this home was listed at $100,000, but they were able to bring the price down to $80,000 because of the infamous murders that happened in the home. In this 5-bedroom home, not only did they get a swimming pool and a boathouse, it was located on a canal, but in the price for the home, the price included the DeFeo's furniture. So the family that was just murdered inside of this home had obviously left all of their belongings there. And the realtor was like, if you want this stuff, it'd be like an extra $400 tacked on. The Lutzes are like, okay, cool, it's a deal, let's do this. So in the documentary called My Amityville Horror, Kathy's son Daniel, who was 9 years old at the time of the move-in, he recalls that he didn't know about the DeFeos or their death until the day they were moving into the home. He said they got to the house, they arrived at the home in the car, and his mom leaned into the car in the back seat and told the kids about the murdered family. Daniel was asked the question in this documentary. He was asked, what do you recall when you first moved into the house? And he responded that I thought I could like it. I figured it'd be big enough to keep George away from me. This is pretty cool. I could work with this. And as you have guessed, Daniel is not a fan of his new stepfather, George Lutz. My main source for part 2 of this episode is The Amityville Horror by J. Anson. So it is mid-morning at about 10 a.m. It's moving day. They're hauling boxes, packing up the truck, unpacking the truck. Daniel says in the documentary My Amityville Horror, I couldn't believe that we were on the water with the dock and the boathouse. He said he ran up the staircase to see how big the house was, and about a quarter of the way into moving, Father Frank Mancuso shows up. Father Frank Mancuso was having an appointment at the home that day to bless the new home for the family. Father Mancuso says in the book that he felt very uneasy that day. He had an appointment that day to go bless the home, and the priest says that he had no idea that the DeFeos were murdered in that house. He only found out because some friends told him while he was at a lunch. He arrived about 1:30 p.m. to the Lutz home, and as he was splashing his holy water all around the house, he says that he heard a man's voice say, "Get out." He says that he felt like this voice was right behind him, but when he turned around, nobody was there. As the priest walked to his car to depart, he warned George that this was the DeFeo home. And George told him that they knew and they didn't really care. That didn't bother them at all. While spending their first night in their new home, young Danny Lutz comes running into the house yelling, "Harry is in trouble." Harry was the family dog, and they could hear him howling outside. The dog had tried to jump over the fence, and now it was choking on its own chain leash. In the documentary that I mentioned earlier, Daniel Lutz recalls this event as one of the most traumatic parts of his childhood. He says, "I wish I could get rid of it. In my dreams, my entire life, the dog going ballistic, jumping the fence." Daniel tried to help him, but he wasn't strong enough. He says it was a recurring dream, probably 500 times in his life. I was in therapy for this one for a while. It's never about the dream. It's about the emotions it inflicted. I had no knowledge of the murders. I didn't know anything. The events of the dates December 19th through the 21st of 1975 are as follows. George awakes to a loud knocking at his front door. But to George, it sounds like it's actually coming from the room next to his, not the front door. And now he hears a loud crack coming from the ceiling. He looks out the window and he sees a figure moving near the boathouse. He tells the dog Harry to go get him, thinking that this figure was another animal. So George goes down to the boathouse and Harry is just still barking nonstop, but there's nothing there. And the boathouse door is now just swinging in the wind, so George locks it again. He goes back to bed, and then the next morning, while Kathy is in the kitchen, it's very early, she says that she was startled by her young daughter, Missy, and Missy just walks into the kitchen and says, "I want to go home, Mama." I don't know where that weird, "Mama," came from. Okay. So George comes in and Kathy notices that he hasn't shaved and his hair is all messed up. And George is never like this. George is he looks very good all the time. He also hasn't been going into work. And as the two are talking about their day in the kitchen, the two younger boys are outside playing and they're being so loud. And it's then that George slams his hand down on the table and yells, "Kathy, can't you keep them quiet?" And this is the first time Kathy had ever witnessed George lose his cool over the kids. All he did the past few days was just yell and sulk and complain. He just seemed off. And she just thought, you know what, maybe it's just the stress of this move. So let's just get through this day and then we can sleep it off. But that night, George could not sleep. He could not stay warm. He stayed up alone, just feeding logs into the fireplace until he decided it was time to go to bed. But then he still couldn't sleep. So again, at 3:15 a.m., he is wide awake. He couldn't stop thinking about the boathouse. He was just drawn to the boathouse. The next night in the home, What happens is the children are accused of cracking a pane of glass on one of the windows, and both George and Kathy go crazy on the kids. They beat all three kids with a strap and a large, heavy spoon. In the documentary, My Amityville Horror, Danny states that these beatings happened all the time before they even ever lived in this home. So this was normal behavior. This was not ghosts or spirits making them hit their children. The next morning, after they had beaten their children, this was the coldest day yet, and Kathy says that as she sat at her kitchen table alone, she said that she felt a sweet embrace come up behind her and hold her, embrace her. But then she said she heard her son screaming from upstairs, like, "Mommy, come here," from the upstairs bathroom. She runs upstairs, and when she walks into the bathroom, she can see that the toilet bowl is just filled with a black, gooey tar substance. And this is when Kathy says that she started smelling this sweet-smelling odor that from that point on would now always follow her around this home. Kathy goes to every bathroom in the house, realizes this isn't just happening in that one room, it's happening everywhere. So she did blame her children at first. She did say they must have done this. What did you put in the toilet? And she yelled at them while they just begged her to believe them that they had nothing to do with this. And not only is there black tar, gooey black substances coming up from the toilets, but in the fourth bedroom, it was on the second floor of the home, they were going to be using that room as their sewing room. And inside of that room, there were just hundreds and hundreds of flies just buzzing around. And this was in the dead of winter in a freezing cold room. On December 23rd, they wake up to find out that their heavy wooden front door is just completely off of its hinges. It's just hanging there. The doorknob was twisted, and it looked like it was pushed in, but it was pushed from the inside. So was someone trying to get out? That day, they find Missy in the sewing room where she was told never to go, and she was just humming by herself. And when she stops humming, and without turning her head, she didn't even turn to look at her mother's standing there in the doorway. Missy's back is facing her, and Missy just says, "Mama, do angels talk?" I'm not quite sure. Again, I don't know why I chose to give Missy this weird, almost like Little House on the Prairie voice. Because I'm sure, she lived on Long Island. She was probably like, I don't know. I can't do I'm not going to even try to do a Long Island accent, but you understand what I'm saying. So Missy asks her mother if angels talk, and just as she's asking this, they can hear the two boys upstairs fighting, punching, kicking each other, crying, screaming. Kathy is startled. She runs upstairs and she slaps both boys right in the face. Again, she says to the boys, "What is going on around here?" First it's Missy and her angels, then it's you two idiots. I've had it. Good Lord, Kathy. Kathy leaves the situation and she's upset at this point and she's in a rage. She opens her closet door and she finds one of the crucifix that she had put up in every room. She finds it hanging upside down. So we are on to the next day that the Lutzes spend in the house. I believe it is day 6. So on this day, Father Mancuso, who had visited the home on the very first day, he becomes violently ill. He has a fever of over 104. He starts having visions of the sewing room. And now George is saying that he had urges to call the priest all day, but he didn't know why. The priest calls the Lutzes to tell them that they need to stay out of the sewing room. So to set the scene, George is just sitting there by the fireplace, again, just poking at the fire over and over while the priest says, "Listen, you and Kathy and the children, you do not go into that sewing room." Then the call ends. There's static. George keeps trying to call the priest back, but he can't get a hold of him. It is now Christmas Day at the Lutz home, and George wakes up at, you guessed it, 3:15 a.m. When George wakes up, he says that he sees Kathy, but she's lying on her stomach face down. He touches her, and when he does touch her, she screams, "She was shot in the head! She was shot in the head! I heard the explosions in my head!" Obviously, a reference to the horrific events of the DeFeo family. But George still goes down, like he does every night, around the same exact time at 3:15 a.m. to go check on the boathouse. This time, though, something a little different happened to George when he was going back into the house. He turned around to enter the home, and as he did, he looked up and he could see Missy just sitting in her bedroom window, staring down at him. He said it was a heart-stopping vision. It was just Missy staring at him, her eyes following him. And coming into focus now, directly behind Missy, was the face of a pig. A demonic pig with bright red, glaring demon eyes, staring at George with hatred. George runs up to Missy's room, and when he gets in there, swings open the door. Missy is asleep, and she is asleep on her stomach, fast asleep. But in the corner of her room, her little rocking chair was rocking back and forth, back and forth. It's now 9 p.m. on that Christmas night, and Kathy walks by Missy's room. She can hear her say, "Isn't the snow beautiful, Jody?" So Kathy looks in and she sees that Missy's alone, staring out the window. And she says, "Who are you talking to, Missy? An angel?" "No, Mama, just Jody." Kathy's like, "Who's Jody?" And Missy says, "Jody is a pig. He's my friend. No one can see him but me." Now, okay, George saw the pig, right? Like, he saw the pig, and he didn't tell his wife. Like, didn't he share that information with Kathy the next day so that when your 5-year-old daughter is like, "Oh, I have a pig as a pet and he's invisible and he's a demon," I would be like, "Okay, guys, let's go to a hotel." We are now at December 26th, the day after Christmas, and the Lutzes have a family wedding to attend, which, by the way, that's a little bit rude, I think. I don't know. It's like Christmas is so stressful, and then the next day, now we have to do a wedding. Come on, guys. Well, anyway. So now George has developed intense diarrhea, nausea, but he's got to go to the wedding. He's got to power through. So at this point, the house is just getting colder and colder by the day, and George is just also stone cold, acting weird. Missy's still talking to a demon pig, and no one seems to be weirded out by anything. So Missy tells Kathy that day, Kathy is now just a hot mess at this point. She is losing her cool over anything that happens. Missy says to her, "Jody says you shouldn't cry. He says everything will be all right soon." Jody best get to moving on, is what I would say. But anyway, during the wedding, they're taking communion, and George says that when he took the communion, he got so dizzy and so nauseous. In the book by J. Anson, it actually describes George walking up the stairs, and it says, and I quote, "I was thinking about my wife and our warm, soft bed." Now, okay, I was borderline just lost on this story. But this part is, there's a demon pig, and in true Stay Paranoid fashion, the book is written by a man that the Lutzes hired. And hopefully you've already guessed by now that I'm not buying it. And the dude hasn't thought about his wife for a second. Now he's excited to go get cozy. I don't know. It's just, I don't know why that part threw me off even more so than everything else. So let's continue on with this abbreviated version of what the fuck was spinning in the minds of these two homebuyers who clearly bought a home that they knew was the scene of a murder of 6 people. And okay, before I continue, I just want to take a moment to quote Danny Lutz as an adult in the documentary My Amityville Horror. Danny says into the camera, "Well, George isn't here." And then he smiles and says, "I'm sorry, I can't help but laugh when you say that." And Laura says, "What, that he's here?" And Danny says, "No, that he's dead now." And he smirks. And she says, "You're happy that he's dead?" And Danny says, "Yes, ma'am, and I'm a free man now." Danny Lutz is asked, "Do you think of yourself as the guy from Amityville?" And he says, No, because I'm Danny." He says that George would walk around town introducing himself as the Amityville guy. "I'm that guy, that's me." Danny says he was the biggest fucking asshole you could ever meet. It is now going to be December 28th, and in the book, they actually go day by day. They're going to tell another story about the priest, about Father Mancuso again. I decided to stop even telling you the stuff that they're saying because I took this from an article in 2023, The Untold Truth of the Amityville Horror. So this is a quote from that article. "And this is where you should start taking everything with a truckload of salt. The priest's name was Father Ralph Pecoraro, although he is named Father Mancuso in the book. And according to George, the Lutz family was unpacking their stuff from a rental van when Father Pecoraro arrived, went inside the house by himself, and according to Amityville lore, the priest went into one of the upstairs bedrooms, and that's when things got freaky. As he began sprinkling holy water, Father Pecoraro supposedly heard a deep, otherworldly voice that shouted, 'Get out.' Then he said he felt a slap in the face. Being a sensible man, Father Pecoraro decided to follow orders." Now I'm going to read this next thing word for word. "The facts presented in the Lutz vs. Weber lawsuit showed the ghost stories surrounding the DeFeo house to be questionable at best. Moreover, facts uncovered in the suit told a very different story about Father Ralph Pecoraro, aka Father Mancuso, than the one presented by J. Anson's fictional novel. There are discrepancies between what was written in J. Anson's book about Father Pecoraro and what George Lutz described in the civil case against William Weber. Anson's book said that Father Pecoraro had met George Lutz 2 years earlier and that he had, quote, helped Kathy and George in the days before they were married. During this interrogation, George Lutz is asked to state whether or not you know the Reverend Ralph Pecoraro, and if so, state the date, time, and place you first met him. George Lutz answers, "I met him on or about July 14th, 1975. Kathy's response to the same question was, "I met him on or about July 30th, 1975. I only ever spoke to him on the telephone." Now, the Lutzes got married July 4th, 1975, so Father Pecoraro could not have offered any kind of guidance to the Lutzes before they were married. I think you see where I'm going with this. So those were facts that were presented in the Lutz versus Weber lawsuits. And you remember William Weber from part 1. He was Ronnie DeFeo Jr.'s lawyer, defense attorney. And this article, I actually found it on the AmityvilleMurders.com. We are at January 2nd, 1976. George wakes up to see that the garage door is almost ripped off its hinges. He's mind blown. He's like, oh my God, this is like the pig. And he thought, oh my God, what is going on here? I feel like from January 2nd to January 7th, we're kind of like stretching the story a little bit. George calls some parapsychology people to come in and talk to the ghost in the house. And at this point, Kathy just wants to leave. And she wants to go stay with her mom for a little bit, but it was freezing out and the roads were horrible. So it's on this day that Harry the dog is too scared to go into Missy's room. But Missy makes him stay, and he stays under the bed until one of the boys lets him out. At around midnight, Kathy falls into what is described as deep sleep, breathing heavy. It's now 1 a.m. George hears what he describes as a boat. He also has been hearing what he described as a marching band. George would hear a marching band tuning up, or what sounded like a clock radio playing not quite on frequency. And whenever he would go downstairs to investigate this noise and this marching band, all the noise would stop. So he hears a boat this night and he's like, you know what? I'm so warm in my bed right now. So I'm not getting up to go downstairs because every time I do, there's nothing there anyway. So he sees Kathy. She's on her back. Her mouth is open and he feels like, yeah, okay, I know I'm freezing, whatever. You know what I need? I need a beer. I need a nice cold beer. It's 2 a.m. He decides that he's going to wake Kathy up to tell her that he's going to go get a beer. Okay. And when he turns to Kathy, he's like, she's levitating. Kathy is levitating. And that's when she wakes up in the middle of the levitation. And George looks at her and he says, "Oh my God, you are so ugly. You're 90. Okay. The book literally says this. It says, George was so revolted, he wanted to flee from the room. That is like really mean. So, okay, Kathy had this distorted face. They say she looked like she was 90. She had wrinkles, and they describe her as an ancient crone. This is what the author calls Kathy. Kathy's just yelling like, "What's happening to my face?" And he says to her, George says, "I don't know, baby." And he whispers it. George puts his hands on her shoulders and says, "I'm going to call Father Mancuso." And Kathy is like, no, you are not. Because we do not want that priest coming here and getting hurt. And it's at this point where the whole book lost me. Even more so than it did a little bit earlier. There's this house and it's haunted, because I gotta tell you, I do believe in haunted houses. I do believe that these things happen to people, but this one is looking real good to be the fact that these two knew they could cash in on this. I mean, they bought a murder house at this point in time. The Exorcist was a huge movie, and I mean, people were really going hard for demonic spirits, for, paranormal activity. Okay, let me get back into what happened in this house. So they are, somewhere around January 8th. So George invites his friend Eric to come over. He's a coworker, and Eric has a girlfriend named Francine. These two are described as just this happy, joyful couple. And as they're hanging out with George and Kathy, everyone starts to have like this great night and everyone's acting a little chill, Kathy and George aren't angry anymore. Francine tells them that she can talk to spirits. And so she told them that when you feel cold air, it's a spirit. She also said she could smell an unusual odor, almost like sweat or perspiration. She said she saw an old man and an old lady in the house. And then she said they must have owned the house at one point, but they did not die in it. Francine asks now if she can go to the basement. She knows nothing about this home, and she says this house is built on a burial ground or something like that. That was a quote. She stops in front of a closet and says, "There are people buried here. There is an unusual odor. It should not be stuffy at all like this." And she says, "Somebody was murdered or even buried here." Francine says that they all need to go back upstairs, and she looks at her boyfriend Eric and she was like, "I would like to go now." She said she'd return in a few days when the vibrations in the house felt a little better. But George finds out that Francine will never ever return to that house because the force is so strong that she feels it could also just endanger her. Now, Kathy's brother Jimmy and his new wife Carrie are going to come over to the house, and they're going to hang out with the couple, and they're going to end up spending the night in little Missy's room. They made Missy sleep on the couch, and they were going to have her brother and sister-in-law sleep in the room, and everyone goes to bed early. They lock up the house, but 3:15 rolls around and Carrie wakes up screaming. Carrie and Jimmy are laying in Missy's bed, holding each other, freaking out. And Carrie says that something touched her from the bottom of the bed. She says that she woke up and she saw a sick little boy that was asking for help. He said to Carrie, "Where's Missy and Jody?" It is now day 20 in the home, and Kathy is losing her mind again, screaming her head off. And George is like, "What is happening again?" So he runs up to the third floor where Kathy is just screaming at her kids. Now, when he gets up to the third floor, he sees there is this green slime oozing everywhere from the ceiling, dripping down the walls. This slime is everywhere. Kathy yells this to the children: "Which one of you did this? Tell me now or I'll break every bone in your bodies." Why would you think the kids put green slime on the walls, though? I mean, like, come on. At this point, like, you guys are, like, levitating, turning 90. You have a demon pig. You have, like, flies everywhere. You have a marching band. Your friends don't want to be there anymore. You have a little sick boy. Okay, yeah, I'm sure the kids did it. And come on, Kathy. You don't break the kids' bones, my goodness. George is like, "Kathy, calm down. Stop. Let me figure this out, okay?" So he goes to the wall and he puts his finger on the slime and he just rubs his finger through the slime and then he puts it up to his nose and he smells it. And then he licks it because he said that it looked like green Jell-O. He says it has no taste, and Kathy says, "Do you think it could be paint?" The boys and George all take buckets of this slime down to the water and they just keep dumping it into the water. At this point, Kathy still thinks it was the kids. And that night, by the fireplace, Kathy finally suggests that they leave. And George is like, "Oh, hell no." He tells Kathy, "Every damn thing we have is in this house." So at this point, George is losing his mind again, and he's running through the house yelling, "Get out! Get out in the name of God!" He's yelling this in every single room to all of the ghosts. Day 21 in the house. Kathy wakes up. She's got red welts all across her stomach, and even if you touch the red welts, they're going to burn you. So she doesn't want to go to the doctor. She sleeps the day away, and when she wakes up, the marks are just gone. And she says she felt completely relaxed after the marks were gone. She says this in the book, that she had been completely satisfied sexually. She said that she had dreams about making love to someone, but it wasn't George. On January 11th, the whole family hears George screaming at the top of his lungs again. In the morning, he's screaming, "I'm coming apart," throughout the whole house. And now we're going to be on January 12th. And Missy, "Oh yes, Mama, I see Jody all the time. He's the biggest pig you've ever seen." Missy says that to her family, so still didn't leave. Now, we're on January 14th. And this is the day that Danny sees a monster with no face in his room. And they see a, quote, being dressed in white. This is when they decide to flee. And as they flee, George gets everyone into the van and he says to himself, "Thank God. Thank God I'll never see you again, you son of a bitch." He says that to the house as they're pulling away. The Lutzes flee. The Lutzes leave every single thing they had in that house and they flee. I mean, most of it was the DeFeo furniture, but even their clothes, everything, just gone. They're out. On February 18th, 1976, Martin Scott of Channel 5 wants to investigate this so-called haunted house, and he wanted to spend the night inside with psychics and demonologists. The Lutzes agreed to let him inside of the house to film, and George and Kathy declined to enter the house again. They're like, "No, we're never going back in there." So inside of the house that night, these demonologists, psychics, they performed 3 seances. And Lorraine and Ed Warren were also there. And you obviously might already know Edward and Lorraine Warren. They were American paranormal investigators and authors associated with prominent cases of alleged hauntings. These two also had 2 psychics and a psychic researcher with them. The first seance was at 10 p.m., and one of the psychics had to leave because she got ill during one of the seances. Lorraine Warren says, whatever is here is most definitely a negative nature. It has nothing to do with anyone who has ever walked the earth. It is from the bowels of the earth. The cameraman says that he also had heart palpitations during the seance, and he said that he had a shortness of breath when he entered the sewing room. They should have called this movie The Sewing Room. After this, the windows were boarded up and the Lutzes signed their interest over to the bank that held the mortgage. They left behind everything, as I said before, and they fled to California. After the Lutzes fled and they abandoned the house, they end up meeting up again with William Weber. They get a meeting with him. And as we said before, that is the lawyer, the defense attorney for Ronald DeFeo. William Weber was already at that time shopping around the idea of a book about the DeFeo family murders, and he was going to call that book Devil on My Back. This is according to William Weber. So he says that he and the Lutzes had a brainstorming session, and they did this over, quote, many bottles of wine. He said that as they sat there drinking, the Lutzes start sharing the story of all of the crazy, weird things that happened to them while they were in the house. These three are very tipsy, possibly wasted, and they're just coming up with different scary scenarios. Now, this is a quote from William Weber in 1988. He says, "We took real-life incidents and we transposed them. In other words, it was a hoax." William Weber gets into a dispute with the Lutzes because he says that if they go ahead and they do this book together, that he wants to take a part of the deal. He wants to split the book deal with the two of them. And they're kind of like, why would we split it with you? Like, this happened to us. So the Lutzes, they go and they find Jay Anson, and he ends up being the one that wrote The Amityville Horror, a true story by Jay Anson. He was a journalist and a filmmaker who had made a short documentary on the making of The Exorcist. I found a really great quote by Jay Anson. It was in an article titled The Real Story Behind the Amityville Horror House by Dave Roos. This was published on October 18th, 2022. Jay Anson states, "It's funny, almost nobody ever says to me, 'Hey, that book of yours is a bunch of bull. I didn't believe a word of it.' Instead, they ask if I think what the Lutzes told me is true. And I answer them the same way I answered you when you asked the question. I tell them that I have no idea whether the book is true or not, but I'm sure that the Lutzes believe what they told me to be true." Today, in the year 2024, people still live in the Amityville Horror House. The home has been sold and bought over and over during the years since the Lutzes abandoned it, and most recently, in January of 2023, the home sold for $1.46 million, and that was $240,000 less than the original asking price. The home still stands at 112 Ocean Ave, but the address was changed to 108 Ocean Ave, and that was to deter tourists. None of the newer owners in the years since the Lutzes abandoned the home have ever reported seeing any psychic phenomena. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Residue. If you enjoyed it, please share with your friends, and maybe if you feel like it, leave us a review or follow the show, and definitely join me again next week. We will be talking about another story that's going to teach you how to stay paranoid.